What's up? Welcome to Journey in the Self. I'm your host, Sarah. Over the course of the past couple of weeks, I've had a number of people approach me for counsel because they were going through stress. They were having a difficult time managing what's going on in their minds. They've acknowledged that they're thinking too much. And as a result, they're getting stressed out, depressed. Some people are also frustrated with where they are in life and anxious about what's going on currently in the external environment, the political situation, the economic situation. And all these things can affect us if we're not aware. So, given that the circumstances are very prone to creating stress for us, creating fear, and how, if we allow ourselves to be drawn into those emotions, how it ends up creating adverse circumstances for us. I thought it would be good for us to do a piece on managing our minds and to talk about how we can do it and the importance of doing so. As you've known, if you've been following the show, I've been doing a series on exposing the connections that Trump has to the establishment, if you will, dispelling the notion that he's an outsider. But again, these are things that are happening. And these are going on in the external environment, creating a lot of anxiety and attention. So again, if we allow ourselves to get too caught up in those things, then we can find ourselves in a negative emotional state. And that ends up contributing to getting us caught up in stress and unconsciously creating negative circumstances for ourselves. I happen to also be in the midst of teaching a class where I also felt it necessary to explain the importance of being aware of and managing our emotional state, our mental state, being aware of our thinking. So I often use this piece that I found in a spiritual book, and I usually either read this to people or send it to people who to basically underscore the importance of managing our mind, managing our thoughts. And it's called Thinking Problems. So I'm going to read that to you here. Then we'll start. It's called Thinking Problem. It started out innocently enough. I began to think at parties now and then just to loosen up. Inevitably, though, one thought led to another, and soon I was more than just a social thinker. I began to think even when I was all by myself. Thinking became more and more important to me, and finally, I was thinking all the time. I just couldn't control myself. I began thinking on the job. Soon, I had a heavy reputation at work as a heavy thinker. One day, my boss came to me and said, I like you, and it hurts me to say this, but your thinking has become a real problem. If you don't stop thinking on the job, we're going to have to let you go. That gave me a lot to think about. At my next checkup, my doctor told me that my heavy thinking was giving me high blood pressure, and that if I went on like this, I might not live much longer. But today, I'm a recovering thinker. Life is so much more peaceful now that I stopped thinking. Now, that piece is humorous, but it is very much on point because it underscores how thinking can not only affect our state of mind, it affects our actions, it can affect our emotions, it puts negative vibrations into the universe, it creates, it can also cause stress, and excessive stress, as is indicated at the end of the story, it could end up having an adverse effect on our health. That's why an acute illness is referred to as dis-ease. Dis-ease. So when we are at dis-ease, it manifests itself in our body. So that really underscores the importance of being in awareness of our mental state and being in control of it. I've mentioned before how failing to do so is akin to getting in to your car, turning on the ignition, and then putting your foot on the accelerator without placing your hands on the steering wheel. And so we're letting the vehicle drive itself. We're not steering it. And we know what would happen if we were to actually try to do that. We'll end up crashing into something and possibly killing ourselves and killing others. But that's essentially what we're doing if we just allow our minds to just go where it is want to go. Typically, if we let our mind just wander randomly, it will invariably end up drifting towards negative thoughts. The reason for that is because that is how our lower self, our ego self, tends to work. The ego is basically in control of the mind. And since the ego self wants to get us or can keep us under its domain, it controls us by controlling our minds, controlling our senses, controlling our emotions, controlling everything in the physical. So one of the things that it's important for us to do is to shift our orientation. What I mean by that is we typically look at reality backwards. We consider the physical world, the physical realm, to be real, and we tend to regard I'll call it the etherical realm or the spiritual realm. We look at it not realizing that that is the permanent realm. So we don't identify with it as deeply and as connectedly as we should. We don't realize as a result the power of the spirit realm, the etheric realm. We don't realize that the spirit realm, the etheric realm, is where creation occurs. If we are familiar with any of the creation stories that go across all cultures, whether you're using the Christian frame of reference, the Bible, or you go beyond that into the creation stories of all cultures, the indigenous cultures, from which those the Bible and other narratives were created. They all talk about the process of creation. And the Memphite theology and Kemet, they talk about how the primordial waters, the noon, existed in the void. And out of this void ended up rising Atum, which ended up beginning the creation process. And when we study that, we realize that spirit, creator spirit, they all began the process of creation basically by thinking, deciding that it wants to create to, and I can't, say with certainty. Of course, no one really knows the mind of God other than those who have attained eternal consciousness. But those people have described basically that God wanted to create to have experience and has created this physical realm, imbuing itself into creation. But in order to be able to initiate that process, the impetus was thought. Interestingly, in the Kemetic pantheon, one of the primordial gods is the god of wisdom, uh, Thoth, as the Greeks would call it, Tehuti. But if you look at that word Thoth, Tehuti, you can see that the word thought emanates from that. So it is thought that begins the process of creation. It's said in the text that we are microcosms of God. And when I say microcosms, it's essentially that we are to God what a droplet of water is to the ocean. We are made of the same substance. And as such, being of the same substance, we have the same capacities. In other words, we are miniature gods. We create the same way. Unbeknownst to us, however, is that we are always creating. The issue is that more often than not, we are creating unconsciously. So, as I pointed out, the thoughts are vibrations that go into the universe, and thoughts are like the seeds of creation. The more we hold on to a thought, the deeper we're planting that seed into the soil, if you will. The intensity with which we hold that thought amplifies it and feeds its growth, much like fertilizer. The amplification of thought occurs with the emotions that end up being associated with those thoughts. Okay. And so, as the George Clinton song or the Funkadelic song written by George Clinton goes, uh, the song Good Thoughts, Bad Thoughts, be careful of the thought seeds we plant in the garden of our mind, for seeds grow after their kind. Good thoughts bring forth good fruit. BS thoughts rot our meat. Right. So we're creating either consciously or unconsciously. But most of us aren't aware that we're creating. We're not aware of and we're constantly going through the thought process. We're not aware of the thoughts and how we're planting thought seeds when we allow thoughts to go through our minds randomly and then allow ourselves to get fixated on certain thoughts without being in control of them. Then, as I pointed out, more often than not, because we tend to be controlled by our lower self most of the time, then we end up creating things that are negative. We're holding on to those type of things, holding on to those that nature of thoughts more often than not, if we're not maintaining awareness of ourselves. Okay, so when we're in stressful times like this, or I don't want to call it stressful times, but times that are challenging, then it presents the it increases the likelihood that we can get caught up in stress, because it makes it more of a it makes it more important for us to be aware, to be mindful, because if we don't, then we can easily get caught up in the circumstances. And that's why I wanted to like just basically withdraw from what's going on, withdraw from all the things that are going on in the external environment with Trump and all the different actions that he's taking to create fear and anxiety, because he and those of his ilk, those who are struggling to maintain control over world affairs, they're in fear because we are in a state in the cycle of time where we're moving out of the dark period and moving into the light, because they know this. They are desperate to be able to maintain control. That's why we had things like the Patriot Act and all the increased surveillance activities, and that's why they work so diligently to keep us in a constant state of fear, because when we are in fear, it makes us much more easily controlled and manipulated. So that's what's going on right now. And a lot of people are falling prey to that. Thus we see people have these polarized mindsets that are typically fear driven. And we have so much polarity going on between people, a lot of disagreement. People can't see things the same way because they've been manipulated. Their minds have been controlled. So a lot of people are in a fearful state of mind. A lot of people are experiencing stress. That's why a lot of people have been coming to me talking about how difficult they're having how difficult of a time that they're having being able to control their minds, which has manifested itself in them stressing out, being depressed, frustrated, anxious, having difficulty being able to sleep. Okay, and what's important is that, if we allow ourselves to get drawn into those negative emotions, as I pointed out, the emotional state acts like a fertilizer which amplifies the thoughts and helps whatever thoughts are being emanated, it helps to manifest them. Right. And so it works on either the positive or the negative. If we are thinking negative thoughts and we're amplifying them with negative emotion, it increases the likelihood that we bring that into manifestation. It increases the power of the manifestation. Conversely, if we are thinking about the things that we want that are positive, that we want to bring into our lives, and amplify it with positive emotions associated with the emotion that we would have if we had it, just as we do when we're anxious about something or afraid of something that's going to happen. We bring that into manifestation. I was explaining to the class I was teaching that my definition of fear is the expression of faith in a negative outcome. Okay, so in the same way, when we express faith in a positive outcome, we bring that to pass. If we allow ourselves to express faith in a negative outcome, then we bring that in the past. Bring that to pass, rather. So I hope that has put things into context and has illuminated the importance of managing our minds, because we are creating with it constantly, either positively or negatively. So now, how do we control our minds? What tools can we employ to maintain, to develop and maintain control over our minds? Those who've been tuning into this show, Journey into Self, should know the answer. But I find that it's necessary to repeat it because often we tend to forget. And so it's always important to really repeat it so that it is ingrained in our consciousness, because when we go back into the experience of living life, we tend to just basically default to the behavior that we've engaged in before, which ends up resulting in us in repeating the same patterns. And so it's important to be able to just continually repeat these things until they become ingrained in our consciousness and become part of what we do. Right. And so that's why I'm going to repeat this. And I've noticed the same thing when I've been in the presence of spiritual masters. Often they will repeat the same message, maybe change how they deliver it, but certain principles will be repeated because it's necessary to really ingrain it into our consciousness. Because we'll often fall back into our old patterns and habits. Okay, so the best way for us to be able to gain control and mastery over our minds is to engage in the practice of meditation. And I can't underscore that anymore. I just attended 2 spiritual retreats over the past 2 weekends. That was also a common theme in those retreats. The power of the mind and the importance of us being in control of the mind, and the importance of engaging regularly in the practice of meditation. And I'll explain why. And I'll also explain one of the pitfalls that I find that people get drawn into. Not that it's meant to do that, but this is one of the things that I've observed. Okay, but so meditation is something that is important, imperative that we engage in on a regular basis, and it is from the disciplines that we develop from practicing meditation that allow us to be able to master our minds. You know, you have a lot of people who, talk about manifestation, the power of positive thinking and being able to manifest things. But everything that they're teaching is basically excerpted from spiritual teachings, and they're just taking, portions of it, which are true. But the issue that I take with some of those is that by just excerpting it and focusing it only on manifestation, it ends up creating other problems of attachment. But I'm going to leave that lecture to another time. So, during the process of meditation, the objective is to detach from thoughts, to detach from thoughts. What do I mean by that? Detaching from thoughts is basically withdrawing our energy, withdrawing our attention from thoughts. That's different than trying to drive the thoughts away or trying to stop ourselves from thinking. If we're trying to stop ourselves from thinking or try to push the thoughts away, we will find ourselves being frustrated. And that's where a lot of people will give up with meditation, is because if they're actively trying to make the thoughts go away, trying to push them away, then we're giving the thoughts energy, which attracts them to us. And that's why people get frustrated, because the more energy we give the thoughts by trying to make them go away, we're attracting them to us. So the objective is to withdraw our energy from thoughts. So the process is basically like laying on the beach looking at clouds pass by and just allowing them to pass, to enter into no judgment about the clouds, to not think about the origin of the clouds, to not look at how the clouds are formed or pay attention to how they're formed, to just notice them and let them go. They're clouds. Not try to interpret them. Now see one that looks like an elephant or a whale or a sheep. Don't try to interpret it. Just let it go. So in the same way, when thoughts come, and I say when because they will, because thoughts exist in the ether, they exist in the stream of human consciousness like clouds. But we have a choice as to whether we allow them into our consciousness or not. We can withdraw our consciousness from them. We just haven't. So by meditating, we begin the process of withdrawing our energy, detaching from thoughts, and just observing them and letting them go. If you've taken any classes on meditation, you'll note that when we meditate, we are instructed to sit with our spine straight so that we can allow the energy to flow up our spine. We are taught to keep our focus either here at the third eye point between our eyebrows, or focus our attention at our heart. The important thing is to maintain our focus on that one point, whether it is the heart or the third eye point or the heart. But to maintain our focus there and to not allow the focus to waver. There's a physiological reason behind that, which is that when we are thinking, our eyes tend to wander, right? So when someone is thinking a lot, there's a lot of eye activity, right? And so by maintaining the focus in one point, you're physiologically slowing down the rate of thought. Similarly, one of the other things that we're taught to focus on when we meditate is to focus on our breath. And we're encouraged to breathe more deliberately, and keep our focus on our breath, to breathe deeper. And there's a physiological reason behind that too. And that is that when we slow our rate of breath, we're also slowing the rate of thought. So if you just think about the fact that if we end up getting caught up in a negative emotion, whether it be stress, anger, anxiety, then we'll notice that our breathing becomes more restricted. the breaths are shorter and more constricted. Sometimes it might be even faster. Okay. And so often when we get caught up in that state, we'll notice that if we take a deep breath, just the process of taking a deep breath will calm us down. So, okay. And so that's the physiological reason for regulating the breath and focusing on the breath. Okay, and so we close our eyes, we focus our attention at the third eye point or the heart, and we breathe slowly and deliberately. And as thoughts come, we just allow them to go. We don't wonder why they came. We don't pay attention to the nature of the thoughts. We don't identify with them at all because they don't belong to us. We just let them go like clouds. If we notice a thought come into our consciousness, we notice it, withdraw our energy from it, and let it go. Thoughts will come. And there will be times when they will enter into our consciousness, it will slip, will lapse. And we might find ourselves getting caught up in them. But if that happens, again, don't make it mean anything. Just notice it, withdraw our energy, and let it go. Continuing this practice on a regular basis will help us to develop the important skill of detaching. The more we develop the skill of being able to detach, the more we end up having control over our thoughts because we will realize that life then can become like a waking meditation. We slowly come to the realization that as we have progressed in our meditation and in the ability to be able to withdraw our energy from our thoughts, we're detaching from our thoughts, then we realize the power that we have to be able to do that under any circumstances. We don't have to just wait until we are in meditation to do that. We'll realize that we can do that any time we choose. We can detach anytime. We can detach from negative thoughts that come. We can withdraw our energy from challenging circumstances such that it doesn't end up affecting us emotionally. Thus, we don't get drawn into fear, anger, anxiety, or frustration or stress because all those things are associated with what we're thinking about at any given moment. We can withdraw our energy from our thoughts as we are experiencing life. Just like in the story, life is so much more peaceful now that I've stopped thinking. Many of us think that thinking is how we solve many of our problems. But actually, the converse is true. It's actually when we stop thinking that we get the answers. Because by suspending our thinking, we are getting ourselves in tune with spirit. We then are surrendering ourselves to our spirit consciousness. We're allowing ourselves to be guided by spirit. It is thinking that impedes us from connecting with spirit. Yogis who have gone into a deep state of meditation known as samadhi have been analyzed on electrocardiograph machines where they measure the brain activity. And when they've done that to yogis who are in a deep state of meditation, they find that the brain activity is very minimal. Okay, so you look at the EKG chart, whereas typically you see kind of a wave pattern like this, and it's a pretty significant wave pattern, which indicates that the brain activity is high. For a yogi, it's more of a flat line, maybe like some slight blips, but their brain activity is almost undetectable. And when one is in that state, that is when there is very minimal, if any, separation between us and spirit. And that's a state that we ultimately want to attain to where ultimately we become permanently established in that state. That is a state of enlightenment, the state of universal consciousness, union with spirit. That's the objective of all spiritual teachings. That is basically what the word religion means, to reconnect with spirit. And so one of the primary tools of being able to do that is the practice of meditation. And it just occurred to me that religion and the word yoga have similar meanings because yoga means to yoke, to join back with spirit, which is essentially the same meaning as religion. And meditation is one of the aspects of yoga. It's not yoga isn't just the practice of the asanas, the postures, stretching, and so forth. I mean, part of the reason that we do yoga, the stretching exercise, is to make it to where we are more comfortable being in uh, the posture, the correct posture, to be able to meditate more effectively for a longer period of time. And one of the things I learned at the retreat is that ideally, the time that we want to build ourselves up to for meditation is about 40 minutes. Not that I suggest trying to start that way, because you'll get frustrated, because more than likely you won't be able to do that. But that's the goal, right? But just like if you are a beginner in lifting weights, you're not going to jump onto the bench press and put 200 pounds on the bench press. That'll likely be too much. So you can start slower. So in the same way, uh, you're not going to start at the goal of meditating for 40 minutes. Start at 5, increase to 10, increase to 15, and ultimately you'll get there in the same way you do if you're working out at the gym. Start at 50, put 10 more on. Ultimately, you'll get to 200 if you continue. You'll get stronger. The principle is the same. But the point is that through the regular practice of meditation, as we become more proficient at the ability to be able to detach from thought, we will gain a degree of mastery over our minds, to the extent that we can change our state of thinking at will. We can detach from negative thoughts. We can, if we allow the thoughts to affect us and we relapse, we can notice it and withdraw from it. Withdraw from that state of emotion, change the channel of our thoughts, and be back in a state of peace. It is increasingly important for us to be able to develop the ability to do so, because times are challenging. They're going to continue to be challenging. They may even be more challenging, because, as I pointed out, those who are wielding control over the world currently are increasingly increasingly afraid of losing control, and so they're galvanizing their power and control over people and over affairs. That's why the Patriot Act was enacted. That's why there's increasing surveillance. It's not threats of terrorism. It's about control. It's about keeping people in fear and anxiety, which makes people easier to control. Economic times are going to be harder because of what has been done to stimulate the economy over the past 20 or so years. That's inevitable. There's nothing that can be done to stop it. Lowering interest rates is not going to make things better. It's going to increase inflation. There's nothing that can be done. So those things are going to happen. There's nothing that can be done in the physical realm. What we can do, however, is be mindful and conscious over what we are creating. We can influence what happens on the planet by the nature of our thoughts. The world is in a state of agitation because most people's minds are in that state. And so what's going on in the world is an extrapolation and is an extension of the collective human consciousness. And so if we want to affect a change in the state of affairs, we do so by changing the vibration, but we can only do that individually. We can do that by changing what we think. We can't do anything about what other people do. What we can change is ourselves, and that's what we're charged with. That's why I call the show Journey into Self. Because that's what we have control over, and that should be what we are working to do, is to gain mastery over ourself. So with that, I'll bring the this class session to a close. Please put this into practice. You will find it to be greatly beneficial to you. If you would like to work with me and enlist my help in helping you to master these things, please do reach out to me. You can reach out to me on Facebook, or you can visit my website, www.sa-ra.org. That's www.sa-ra.org. And you can sign up for a free 15-minute consultation with me. And then after that, we can determine how I can help you. So with that, thank you for tuning in. Please do put these things into practice, and we will see you next time here on Journey into Self. What's up?